Okay, so it's so we're going to talk about Sinai, the Fundamentally Elusive Foundation. Now, um, what I want to deal with in a certain way is, in a certain way, the very issue of religion in general. Okay, because there is an interesting challenge in our understanding of religion. Um, on a certain level, religion demands of us to accept a reality that is beyond our comprehension. The most fundamental statement about God is that God is incomprehensible to us. Okay, we simply um, cannot understand God, and it's obviously significant. And God somehow gets involved in our lives, but the point is how God gets involved in our lives creates a challenge because it is inherently incomprehensible to our senses or to our understanding to even deal with this. So the point is that that's a real challenge with religion. That's when people talk about religion, they talk about faith, it's not knowledge, it's not intellect, it's faith, and so forth. Point is that by definition, it is the acceptance of a reality which is beyond our comprehension. Now, in a certain way, we all know the classic critique of Christianity, how 3 equals 1, and so forth. The point is that's an inherent, contradiction, and a what is considered to be a fundamental contradiction. 3 doesn't equal 1, and so forth. But the fact is that within Jewish thought, all religious thought, there is always the problem of something being incomprehensible. Okay, Moshe Rabbeinu had the classic question of, if God is just, right? How do you explain bad things happening to good people? And God says, I have an answer you can't understand. The point is that how can I understand justice, which I see is there seems to be some type of idea that I'm supposed to be just, I'm supposed to learn from God in terms of justice, and yet ultimately His justice is incomprehensible. I mean, people don't people don't fully. Okay, so come in. Okay. Okay, so the point is that bad how do you understand justice? I mean, that was really a certain problem of the Akeda, which is not totally the whole binding of Isaac, is in the sense that people don't understand is that Avram challenges God with justice through the stone. Now, he had his own concept of justice. They learned justice from God. It seems to be he had an idea of justice. He challenges God in justice, and so forth and so forth. And he says, "How can how is this just to just wipe out the city?" Now the point is that God basically said, "Yeah, right. You're supposed to learn about justice." At the same point in time, he tells Avram to basically sacrifice his son, kill his son, and how is that just? And there's midrashim that say that's what Sarah challenged Avram. Basically challenged Avram and said, "What are you talking about? How could you say, where's your justice to God by stone, and not raising the questions about the justice of killing your son, Yitzchak, who was a righteous person, and so forth." And there's midrashim say that Sarah was very upset with Avram. But the point is, why does Avram not ask that question? Okay, and the fact is that you see this was a big question to Moshe Rabbeinu. Moshe Rabbeinu basically said, I don't understand how bad things happen to good people, good things happen to bad people. And God said basically, too bad you can't understand. A human being cannot understand. What I'm trying to point out here is that there is a division between our comprehensibility and God. Yeah, Alan, you want to?
Sarah, I thought there's a one midrash that Sarah was upset that it's rejected.
The what?
It's like it's rejected.
Yeah, there's a whole variety. Right, because he was okay. The point is.
Where is this Moshe Rabbeinu with
Harenia, no, it's Harenia Kodecha. It's Harenia Drachecha. You look at the Meforshim Harenia Drachecha, show me your ways. You basically understand the question to be, why do bad things happen to good people?
Wasn't that after the Egel? And I mean, the Egel, he understood.
Yeah, I know. At the point in time, he still has that problem. The idea of why bad things happen to good people and good things happen to bad people, it's not just a new question. The point is that there's always that problem. Even if you want to look in terms of the Egyptians, there are babies who died in the plagues. How does that happen? The point is that in trying to understand this, what I'm trying to say is there is a chasm between our understanding and God. Okay, and God is not physical, right? There's a reason why idolaters created physical beings, because they needed to relate to it. How do you relate to something that's beyond our comprehension? You know what I mean? You know, if you take, let's say, the attitude, the philosophy, God doesn't have emotions. How do you understand how to love God when God doesn't have this emotion of love? According to the Rambam, emotional love is something that's physical. The point is that it's a very difficult challenge. The thing is that this is a challenge in religion in terms of being able to relate to God. Now, the point is how do religions try to resolve it? So if you look at some religions, they basically try to resolve it by by getting their adherents, their followers, to make a leap of faith. Okay, now I'm not using that term in its very specific context, but maybe I am in a certain way. The point of the matter is that in terms of many religions, people like to define their religions in what we would call mystical ways, which means to basically argue that there is another system happening. That system is cannot be explained through reason and rationality and so forth, but it is an idea that there is this kind of idea that you have to have some kind of jump into this God consciousness, which is not rational, which is beyond the rational and so forth, and that is some kind of phrase of faith. Now the truth of the matter is the idolaters did that in certain ways, and that's why in terms of idolatry, for example, not many people recognize that, but early idolatry was very, very sexual. Okay, basically the objective in early idolatry was almost to try and lose the self in the pleasure of the moment. Okay, and the fact is that, and that's why, and by the way, this is the theory of also of Timothy Leary, for example, the Harvard professor. Okay, Timothy Leary, what's he famous for? What? Timothy Leary? No, he's not the meaning of the message. That's LSD. Okay, Timothy Leary is the man of LSD. But what exactly was? Well,
Thank you.
What? Marshall Kuhn, right. But the fact is, yes, there is that idea. But the fact is, Timothy Leary was a professor of religion at Harvard University, and what he felt was that drugs was the closest thing to religion, right? Okay. The point is, in a certain way, you take in terms of Maslow and some of the ideas of Maslow and how religion started moving away, or how the religious experience started turning away from actually belief in a religion. People started talking about how you can have the religious experience without actually believing in the religion, and the argument was supported. I don't think, I'm not saying Maslow support, but there was a lot of references to Maslow in the sense that he saw the desire to have a religious experience as a drive within the human being to take you on a different plane, and therefore this was a religious experience. And basically, it takes you outside the realm of quote-unquote reason. It's basically, we joke around about sex, drugs, and rock and roll. Hey, that's religion. That was religion to idolaters, and the point in the 60s as well. The point is that the idea was, but what it really came from is the fact that God is an entity that's out that really is beyond reason. So the point is, when you think beyond reason, then anything can exist. There can be any type of possibility, right? You want to have this kind of expression. So you want to, and when you want to get involved in religion, you want to get involved in losing oneself. So the point is, you see this especially in the more Kabbalistic trends within Judaism, that you're really trying to lose yourself. And losing yourself has something to do with relating to God. So there's religious aspects that talk about how relating to God is an aspect of bittul hayesh, or the removal of yourself. It's a matter of trying to negate any barrier between you and God. And the point is that you have to understand, if God is totally incomprehensible, then our comprehension can be something that creates a barrier, and that's a powerful issue in religion, and religions deal with it, because one of the problems is if you don't have any reason, then religion can go crazy, and that's why you see what happens with sects and cults and so forth. The fact of the matter is that I'm going to do this. No, it's not. We see someone, we think they're doing something irrational, but really, pursuant to them, it's the smartest thing to do, right? If you really believe that you're going to get a future world by blowing up a certain building, right, and you're really convinced of this idea, then of course you think it's wrong? You don't understand God. God knows it's right. Right? Okay? And the fact is that, it's an issue of understanding God. So the point being is that there is this type of tension in the religious experience. And this tension is fundamental to understanding Torah. And it really finds itself in terms of understanding Har Sinai. Because, very significantly, the very starting point of Torah Judaism is a revelation. Okay? And the point is, it's a revelation that is so unique that it will never be repeated. What the Jews saw at Har Sinai will never happen again. Okay? They confronted God. And they confronted God in terms of as much as a human being could relate to the deity and the very concept of the deity.
And even that they had trouble with.
Yes, of course they had trouble with
Even
it.
for us,
Because
we can't handle this.
and they had trouble with it because everything that they felt was the importance of understanding and thought. Because it's something very significant that Avram Avinu, the first thing he did was defend stone before the Akedah, because it tells you the Avram of the recognition of justice, right, is the one who then goes to the Akedah. He understood his prime directive. I pointed this out before in terms of some aspects of the Eitz Das Tov Ra. that part of the problems of understanding the dilemma that faced Adam and Eve was that on one hand they were to be servants of God. Servants of God basically means you follow God, you don't have to think about it, and so forth and so forth. But on the other hand, Adam and Eve had an objective to be Tselem Elohim. And Elohim is an idea of justice, it's an idea of judge. Okay, and it was very significant to them to be thinkers and to be just individuals. So they were given the objective to be godlike, okay, in terms of understanding God from the human perspective, in terms of justice, in terms of knowing how to care, and so forth, at the same point in time that they had no idea who God really was. And that was part of the dilemma that they faced in the tree of knowledge of good and evil. The point is, it's part of the dilemma that we face with Sinai. In the sense that Sinai basically states, is that someone at the door?
Coming
Oh, okay. Sinai basically states that we are, that Revelation starts. Hi, how you doing? Revelation starts our process, okay, and basically religion comes from Revelation. On the other hand, okay, the problem with Revelation is the fact that it's incomprehensible. Okay, so how do we deal with it? So Judaism has a place for reason. And one of the things that happens is Judaism really has a tremendous value to reason. Okay, our Torah it was given in such a way that it demanded the reason of individuals. Okay, it demanded people to think. God did not just give over the Torah in a fundamentalist way. Okay, when you think in terms of fundamentalist religion, it's God said, and very specifically, God said it clearly, so you wouldn't have to think about it and just do. If God says jump, I know to jump. In Torah, okay, Ramosha points out that God specifically gave the mitzvahs in such a way to say, okay, now you have to think about it, which means that your reason has to be there. Not only that, you were given reason from the idea of seichel, and seichel is also a source for the ethical understanding. So the point is right off the bat, Judaism has a tremendous value in reason, because reason is where we can learn. It's only through reason and our ability to incorporate these ideas into our being that we can incorporate whatever lessons we get from God. Yeah.
I'll throw in a facetious but real question. So then why, in the last 30 to 35 years, we've tended to go more to the right, more to black and white, more to this way, not another, and not recognize the gray, and not recognize that there are stripes.
Thank you. Of course. What's Nishma's slogan? What's our byline? Thank you. Gray matters. Who said that? Alan. Okay. So gray matters. The truth of the matter is that we argue for the gray. Okay, and we're obviously not packing the Colosseum. You know, the point is that there are I think two possible explanations for this. One is that it's hard. It's hard to think and be on top of everything. Therefore, you know, when people talk about the development of the Hasidic model in terms of Jewish thought and so forth, they say because the Misnagdim were all about thinking and so forth and so forth. Now, I don't think it has. I think that I'm not trying to take away from the fact that you have to be considerate of the fact that there are different people and different ways to express things. But the point is that the average person was attracted to this idea that, you know, of a much more much more straightforward understanding of Judaism, and the answers being not as difficult and so forth. So even though we had it was more difficult from a Kabbalistic viewpoint, but the fact is that people were able to relate, and there was a easier way of relating to God. Okay, I'm not trying to say that was the only reason. There is a Kabbalistic side to Judaism, which we hope to get to. The other reality was the advent of Reform Judaism. Okay, when you tell people to think, Orthodoxy really believes in people thinking, but then it says, but within certain parameters. So the point is that, Moshe Mendelssohn, you can think, you know what I mean? But there's a lot of people who were Moshe Mendelssohn in terms of the scholarship he had of Torah, and that was the problem there. So if you look at people, they basically, I know there are times that I've spoken, and please, I'm not trying to compare myself to Moshe Mendelssohn, because Moshe Mendelssohn was up there. He was a big time papa. What? Okay.
We're supposed to say thank you.
Thank you. Okay. Beauty is in the eye of the beholder. The fact is that, but Moshe Mendelssohn. I'm not trying to take away that there might have been issues, but the point is when you do encourage people to think and analyze things, there is a strong possibility for them to sort of go outside the parameters that you want them to work within. And that's what happened with Reform Judaism. Okay, and the reason the Chassam Sofer had such a strong reaction to Reform Judaism was because it was ad kan. It was like there was the line, and he saw, and the Chassam Sofer was a genius and very innovative and had new ideas. Everyone says Chadash Yasam in the Torah. Well, he had a lot of Chadusha. And he had a lot of new. He was a thinking man, but he was very concerned because the Reform were taking things along a path that was problematic. So the point is that there are some issues involved. These are the challenges when you bring thought into. When you tell an individual to think, right? You have to know how to sort of deal with his questions. One of the great problems that exists in education is someone asks you a question that you never heard before. You're a teacher. The guy asks you a question you've never heard before. And it sounds like it's really just, problematic and so forth. So a teacher will respond, we don't ask that question. So we don't do that, so on and so forth. The point is that that's the only way you can respond and so forth. It's a lot more difficult to sit there and say, that's essentially a question. Let me think about it, and I'm sure there's an answer. And I've had that situation come up where a person will challenge, and the point is to sit there and say, I'm not afraid of the question because there'll always be an answer. Okay? Now the point is, in order to understand there'll always be an answer, you have to understand the spectrum that's available. Okay? There's certain answers that don't fit into this system or that system or that system or this system. You got to be able to argue that. Okay, but the point is that I know that one time I was working on a big halachic shiloh with a lot of significance, and myself and another rabbi in town were working on it and so forth and so forth. And he had access to, I think it was Chaim Kanevsky, who was a major posek in Eretz Yisrael. See if he had any way of dealing with the shiloh. Okay, and his response was, Lo zachiti. Now that's a very interesting response. Okay, he did not have a heter. He wanted to have a heter because he felt the heter would have really been more appropriate in the situation, right? But he didn't have a heter. But his response was, Lo zachiti. I was not worthy of finding the answer. The fact is, if you understand that these questions, the problem is not the question. The problem is you don't necessarily understand. And when people start recognizing that there are a lot of issues here you don't understand, and that's something that I hope comes out. Once you understand that God is beyond our understanding, it leads to a certain challenge. Now, so what I'm saying is here you have a starting point of the religion of Sinai, which is revelation. It was a presentation of God. It was incomprehensible, but there's a very unique aspect to it. It was singular. It never happened again, right? It was singular, only one time. Okay, so it was a very unique revelation. It's also very interesting in the sense that if it never happened again, why am I accepting it today? Okay? So I'm accepting revelation today. It didn't happen to me. So why do I accept revelation? So you're making a statement before you were at Sinai, right? So what's really behind that answer? Barry, you don't want to deal with that? What was behind that answer that I was at Sinai?
Sorry.
You were trying to take notes, I understand.
When we say that, do we really mean I or do we mean like neshama?
The neshama. But the point is that what you're dealing with is that Sinai was a unique event. Now, there's problems in understanding the unique event, as you said beforehand. Bnei Yisrael said, Moshe, please go. We can't handle this. It was a unique event. It was mind-boggling. The point is, if you really look at it today, okay, how do we accept Sinai today? Okay, because Sinai was a unique revelational event. It was a unique presentation of God. How do we understand Sinai? So there's an answer that says, you were at Sinai. Your neshama was at Sinai. Which means you're starting to accept a Kabbalistic understanding of yourself. That you have non-rational understandings of the world that works. Okay? That work.
Well,
So therefore,
the Kuzari argument, right?
that's a Khazar. That's similar
Based
to
on mass revelation.
right. And the fact is the Kuzari basically says, and it's locked into the neshama. Okay. Now the fact is, I asked my wife to bring me the Rambam, because what does the Rambam say? The Rambam basically says that the Rambam develops an idea that understanding things through mystical perceptions and so forth, it touches upon the kind of idea of prophecy, right? It touches upon the idea of that. The Rambam has a great fear that any prophecy or any miracle could be an act of magic. So he's very emphatic that we know about Sinai because it was unique, never to happen again. It never was supported by what we consider to be miracles or anything that we relate to in terms of miracles today, because anything that's a miracle can be challenged. So therefore, what does the Rambam do in terms of accepting Sinai? So to him, it's a rational acceptance of the historical event, which means here's this great event that really is reflected in a unique statement of revelation, which basically says God is unique, okay, and it's a unique that never was repeated, but the way it comes down to us, especially according to the Rambam, is through our rational acceptance of this historical event, with some aspect of the nevuah, and that's connected to prophecy and connected to things like Ruach HaKodesh and miracles, but the Rambam always says with a caveat. It could be magic, which means it could be outside the pale also. In other words, what the Rambam is doing is stating, you know something, we have a problem in our understanding of even Torah. The fact is God is incomprehensible. The incomprehensible nature of God means that there is a dimension that is beyond us. If we totally operate in that dimension, we can't understand it. And we can be misled, because our jumps to that dimension could be misleading, could be false. So the point is that there's an issue. So the Rambam had very strong attitudes towards the mystical perspective. On the other hand, the rational perspective which you follow also is limited, because the rational perspective loses sight of the uniqueness of God. So he's actually arguing that the rational argument for Sinai, that we accept Sinai today, based upon our understanding of Sinai and the fact we're told the truth of it and so forth from the rabbis and so forth, means that we're being told to accept an event that is incomprehensible, which challenges our reason. Okay?
Why is it incomprehensible? What's incomprehensible?
God is incomprehensible. By definition. That's not what happened there. What happened there, yeah, there was lightning and things like that, but there were things that were happening there that were, you want to say contradictory to science, okay. What happened is that God is by definition incomprehensible. He's just, okay, at the same point in time we don't understand his justice. Yet we're supposed to learn from him to be just. Right? Okay? Okay, where it's the fact that there's a mitzvah of emulation. It wasn't just that he didn't understand it, it was everybody didn't understand it, it's the fact that he couldn't understand it at the same time as he was told to try and be just.
You couldn't understand it because we're not capable of seeing the larger picture?
We're not able to see things.
God
Saying God has a larger picture. It's
Limiting.
what?
Limiting.
We're limited, yeah.
It's like, in our modern world, we talk in terms of the Holocaust. Okay? Any way to try and explain the Holocaust, to me, is by definition, totally incomprehensible. Don't even try. On the other hand,
I mean, something so major like the Holocaust, we have not that we'll ever understand it completely, but we have a chiyuv that's the definition that to make sense of it.
Well, yes, we do. So the fact is, what you're talking about is we have to respond to it. We have to try and understand it, knowing full well that we will never fully understand it. But that
my ways are not your ways, but
right.
Within that,
But
he gave us a brain, and we.
Right, but
The
you
whole thing is not
understand.
definition.
But the point of that is the challenge of that idea. See, what I'm getting at is that's really the challenge of Sinai. The fact is that we are starting with a revelation. We're not starting with the God of reason. Okay, God is not just the God of reason in terms of we have to we even though we do accept a value in reason and the ethics of reason, we don't totally reject that. Okay, that there is something where a lot of commentators talk about mitzvah sichlius, they talk about ethics that are sichlius, so we do have reasonable ideas, and we're supposed to act upon those reasonable ideas. But at the same point in time, we have to understand the limitations. The fact is that what is necessary is the recognition of the depth of exactly what you're saying, Alan. The fact is that there is, that at the same point in time that you were trying to understand, you have to recognize that really is incomprehensible. So in a certain way, you're balancing these two ideas. Now this actually is reflected in a lot of Jewish thought, where you see differences between rationalists and mystics. Mystics try to give some reason for things. Rationalists have very, very different opinions to it. Because the rationalist is trying to live within certain confines and get you thinking a certain way. The mystic is trying to get you because there's a certain, if you want to say balance, there's a certain concept behind it. Like for example, let's take the idea of mezuzah. Okay? Okay, so mezuzah. So there are people who tell you if something happens bad within your house or whatever, you should check your mezuzahs, right? Okay? And there's this viewpoint and so forth, because these things happen because there's a problem in the mezuzah. Okay. There are other opinions who say that when you check your mezuzah, it's an act of idolatry. Okay? Who basically say that it's absolutely forbidden to check your mezuzah for that reason. Especially if you just followed the halacha mezuzah. If you just had your mezuzah checked a few months ago, and now you're rechecking with there's no halakhic obligation to recheck it, that's considered to be wrong. Now what's the argument? Because the more mystical argument is that there are other forces in the world, and the mezuzah having a problem is a force that will cause problems and so forth. Okay, there's a breakdown in the mystical chain of commands. Other people would sit there and say, it has nothing to do with it. What's the point of mezuzah? It's to make you think about God when you walk into it. Now, what's the big issue about this? One of the big issues about it is what you're concentrating on. Okay, if someone gets sick, you check your mezuzah, or you take them to a doctor. Right? You do both or whatever. But the point is, some do both. The point is to understand that what hits me is, and that's such a good example because that's I'm not talking about an ethical issue, but the fact is there's certain people who, when they talk about certain mitzvot, they talk about it from a more ethical perspective and find that the mystical arguments for doing it misses the point. Like let me give you an example, and I want to give you an example from a I want to be careful about this example. You take the idea of getting people to put on tefillin, right? Okay. So why is it so significant to put on tefillin? Get people to put on tefillin. Why? It's Al-Pi Torah. What's the idea? The fact is that if you do a mitzvah, it's considered to be, there's a lot of value in doing the mitzvah. Okay, first of all, you're doing the mitzvah. Okay? You're getting someone who's not doing the mitzvah to do a mitzvah. You're bringing mitzvah to the thing. There's the concept of a mitzvah leads to a mitzvah. Mitzvah gurur, a mitzvah, and so forth and so forth. All these concepts and so forth. Now, at the same point in time, Sabra Rav was very, very upset about the tefillin campaigns of the Lubavitcher Rebbe. Now, what was the reason he was upset with it? No.
What did he say?
You didn't think of it first.
You really don't know the Sabra Rav, do you? Okay. Now, why was he upset with it?
Because he didn't think it was going to lead to
Not necessarily.
changing behavior.
No.
Or it was like a one-shot.
No.
Because all the mitzvahs are equal, so why single one?
Okay, but that's the one they singled out. Why was it? Because there's two aspects to putting on tefillin. Do you know what the mitzvah of tefillin actually is? What the biblical mitzvah of tefillin is? Okay. How? What's the mitzvah of putting on tefillin on a daily basis? What? Put it
Be
from.
mindful of the Shavuot.
The fact is the mitzvah of wearing tefillin is during the whole daylight hours. Okay? Okay? Now, right? Now, what happened in the time of the Gaonim, okay, Jews started feeling that they were not on the level to be able to handle wearing tefillin all the days. So they stopped wearing tefillin because they understood that wearing tefillin and you couldn't be on the level of what was necessary to wear tefillin would be a problem. So the point is they decided not to wear it. At all. So then came up the idea that, you know something, we should tell people at least to put it on for davening. Okay, because hopefully they'll be able to. Because if you wear tefillin and start thinking of other things, or other things happen, and so forth, it's a tremendous sin. Now, this is something people don't recognize. Why women did not accept the mitzvah of tefillin? They accept the mitzvah of lulav, they accept the mitzvah of other things. Why didn't they accept the mitzvah of tefillin? Because it's risky. People don't recognize it. They weren't commanded, but other mitzvahs they commanded to, right? So the question exists is, okay, so there's people ask the question, why didn't they start wearing tzitzis? Why didn't they start wearing tefillin? Okay, why didn't they start saying Omer? And then people started saying the Omer and so forth. But the point is that what was the issue with tefillin? So the truth of the matter is, the Sephardim women There was no. They want to put on film. That was fine. The Sephardi poskim basically say it's okay to put on film. The Ashkenazim poskim were very adamant. Don't put on tefillin. Okay, why? Because the chance you're taking with putting on tefillin is really very, very problematic. Yes, you're doing a mitzvah, but if you have an incorrect thought, if something happens and so forth and so forth, it's a tremendous avera. So don't take any chances. A man who has an obligation to tefillin, basically we're saying, okay, we're going to have you take a chance, but just put it on for tefillin, for chakras and so forth and so forth. But it's a chance. Okay, but the fact is, for women, we say, hey, listen, don't take that chance. And a simple example of that is by Sfiras HaOmer. Okay, so there are people who women who do Sfiras HaOmer, and they make the bracha when they do Sfiras HaOmer. Right? Mrs. Kanevsky, Chaim Kanevsky's wife, counts Sfira with a bracha. The way I told my daughters to count Sfira is not to count Sfira with the bracha until the last day. Why? Because if you count Sfira without a bracha, and then you forget along the road, right? Your bracha was levatala. Therefore, men don't have a choice. But men, basically, you got to do the mitzvah. So there's a problem with you not being able to fulfill the mitzvah. But the fact is, or there's a fact you got to fulfill the mitzvah, you want to do it with the bracha. There's an issue like that. But the truth is when you deal with a woman, you basically say to her, listen, why do you have to take the chance of possibly doing a bracha levatala? Right? So that's a different response. So the point is that's an interesting issue. The fact is how you. So the Satmar Rav felt, also a mystic, he felt they don't take a chance with tefillin.
Why do you say you don't have tefillin? I mean, you have to.
Because Lubavitch was putting on tefillin. So he said because Lubavitch started. They had a campaign to put on tefillin because there was a mitzvah tefillin. And Satmar Rav, you know something? These individuals don't understand the holiness of tefillin, but there was more than that. That was one argument. One of the arguments is he also felt that tefillin wasn't dealt with correctly. Now, this is something that I've seen people notice, and I'm not trying to be critical in this matter, but so here are the people doing this mitzvah of trying to get people to put on tefillin, and then you look at the way they respond and the way they talk. You know, you have a guy who's 40 years old being put on tefillin by a kid who's, let's say, 16, right? Come on, do the mitzvah, right? And then the kid says, oh, how great it is, you did the mitzvah, and so forth and so forth. How does the guy at 40 years old feel about the 16-year-old basically saying, oh, you're great now, and so forth? Have you thought about the intellectual, about the emotional responses of people? There are people who've told me that one of the reasons they don't get near the tefillin campaigns is because they feel insulted when a person comes up to them and tells them trying to put on tefillin. That's the rational side. That's what I'm trying to point out. The fact is that in terms of the rational side, you look at emotions, you look at ethics, you look at things like that. The point is understanding Torah is a little bit of a challenge. And the fact is there's the mystical side and there's the ethical side. The point is that both of them come together in Torah. Now that's really what I find to be the unique challenge of Sinai. In that Sinai is a revelational event. It opens up by saying it starts with the incomprehensible. On the other hand, it has, the only way it can relate to you is through some aspect of the comprehensible, which means it has to integrate somehow with the rational. And that doesn't just apply in terms of how we know Sinai, it applies in terms of how we understand Judaism. Because we have a mystical side to Judaism, which is much more tied to the incomprehensible, because we really don't know why pork is bad for us in terms of that, but we know it's bad for us. We can't really understand what it does to our neshama, because we don't have the idea. On the other hand, you also have to recognize that there's a rational side to this idea. And that rational side is extremely significant because it also limits the mystical side, because it says that the source of Torah is unique in terms of revelation. It's not continuous prophecy. See, what happens is that many people who may believe in a revelational event, but then you have prophets along the way. You have the Mormon Church always has their prophet, right? Okay, because therefore there's always that connection to the incomprehensible source. To us, we had prophets, but what was the one big limitation on prophets after Moshe Rabbeinu? They could not voice an opinion in halacha. The fact of the matter is that, and then later on, there was then when prophecy ended, there was a further limitation. Is there a concept of Ruach HaKodesh? Yes, there's a concept of Ruach HaKodesh, but understand the difficulties in understanding Ruach HaKodesh, because, as the Rambam would say from the rationalist viewpoint, how do you know this guy's not just doing magic? How do you know he's actually presenting a true opinion? And the Rambam is very challenging of that. He says you never really know. The only true opinion you have is a true opinion of Moshe Rabbeinu on Sinai. Now, I should point out something. There's an interesting question in this regard. Okay? And that's the question of Korach. Okay? So the Rambam says that at Har Sinai we know the truth of Torah, and the way we know the truth of Torah is because an event happened that was unique, and no one challenged that this was from God. Everyone knew this was from God. Now, one of the individuals at Korach was Korach. One of these individuals at Sinai was Korach. That's in the Nevi'im were there. Saw them at Sinai. You know, so the point of the matter is, all the Ada of Korach were there. Okay, and they accepted the truth. And they accepted that Sinai happened, and they were so convinced of their ideas, they were willing to take a chance with Moshe Rabbeinu and putting their lives on the line. People won't recognize this about Korah. Those people who basically said, Moshe Rabbeinu says, listen, I'm right, you're right. You want to follow your right? Go. But I'm telling you, if I'm right, you're dead. And the people still said, no, we're right. Okay? But the real question is weren't they at Sinai? So how did they mess up and not accept Sinai? They did not accept Sinai. It was the Rambam says, no one at Sinai questioned the validity of Sinai. And that validity was the unique prophecy of Moshe Rabbeinu. Okay, so that's a question. That's a question actually that Yaakov Weinberg asked. Any ideas?
So you're saying Korah, he didn't accept the validity of Sinai?
No, I'm not saying that. It's that he challenged Moshe Rabbeinu. He challenged Moshe Rabbeinu. How could he challenge Moshe Rabbeinu? Because he couldn't.
Okay, if I turn
Thank
the
you,
lights
please.
on?
Yes, the top one is the best one. Turn it twice. Yeah. And if you want, you can, that's fine. And there's a light switch on the other side there. Is that okay with you guys over there? Good. I was actually just thinking of that. The fact is that with Moshe Rabbeinu, the question arises where he really, where Moshe, the fact is you could not say Korah doubted what happened at Sinai. He knew that God spoke to Moshe at Sinai. No questions about it. Rambam says it. No one doubted that God spoke to Moshe at Sinai, that what happened at Sinai. So the question emerges, so how did Korah make his mistake? How could he make his mistake? So the point is Korah could not have challenged what happened at Sinai. So what happened, one of the arguments that's presented is that Korah was much more specific in challenging Moshe Rabbeinu. He had no doubt that Moshe Rabbeinu had the command of God, right? What he thought, Moshe Rabbeinu came down and said, Aaron is going to be the number 2, the Kohen Gadol. So he couldn't have challenged that God told Moshe, the Kohen Gadol. What Korah thought, though, was that Moshe might have put a good word in for Aaron and said, listen, I think my brother would make a good Kohen Gadol. So the fact is Korah was basically challenging Moshe when you were involved with God in terms of his commands. And we know that Moshe asked questions and dealt with issues and so forth and so forth. He said, I think it would have been a good idea to, what Korah was really saying is you should have challenged Aaron being Kohen Gadol. Now, I'm not denying that God told you he is, but you should have been a little bit more vociferous in that challenge. He was wrong, but the point is he did not deny that Moshe was told to pick Aaron. He felt there was something else going on there, which Moshe didn't address. Okay, and then when Moshe addressed it, okay, then perfect, have challenges. But the point is what I'm really getting at is that this is in terms of the title we had for this, right? Sinai is inherently, I don't say contradictory, paradoxical. Sinai demands of us to accept the incomprehensible at the same time as it recognizes that accepting the incomprehensible is impossible and challenging. So how do we take the steps to accept it and also work with the challenges? And that comes down to the issue of rationalism and Kabbalistic thought in many ways. The truth of the matter is, you read about people who are more mystical and people who are more rational. The Rambam was more of a rationalist. Okay, sorry, maybe more mystical. The Ramban clearly was more mystical. The point is that what you're talking about is a certain type of how we balance these things. Okay, how do we balance the comprehensible aspect of what we can comprehend and the incomprehensible aspect? And that's the challenge we have in terms of bringing God into our lives. In a certain way, God is totally beyond us. We can't comprehend God. On the other hand, this is what Alan was alluding to before, we have to somehow bring God into our lives, and that involves some rational understanding. That may also involve, for some people, they bring a little bit more Kabbalistic into it, other people bring more rational into it. But the fact is that once you bring that into it, you basically are talking about a challenge. That you basically understand that I am relating to God at the same time that I don't fully understand this. And therefore there's a certain amount of tension in my understanding, which is fundamental in the Jewish expression, fundamental to the observance of Torah. This is something I was, you were talking about beforehand in terms of dealing with questions and things of that nature. It's that in many ways, people, the biggest problem for people is what they don't comprehend. The inability to relate to that which we don't understand at all. And the fact is that within Torah, it's fundamental that we're relating to an entity which we don't understand. At the same point in time, this entity has given us direction in terms of life within our own perspective. Okay, so he tells us, be just. Go back to this. Be just. Okay, I'm a model for justice. You can't understand my justice. So the point is that's a tension, and therefore, what do we have to do about it? We have to analyze it. We have to think about it. That's really, you talk about Nasa and Nishma, that really is an aspect of what Nishma is about. It's an aspect that we're constantly thinking about things. Now, it's interesting because I made this allusion to fundamentalism and so forth. It's really one of the great sadnesses to me in life, in the sense that Jews are often associated with the fundamentalists. I'm not just thinking in terms of Israel and so forth. But the fact is that we really don't understand the perception that non-Jews have of revelation. Their understanding of revelation is that God is going to be clear and we're not going to think. Okay, I'm reading this book now. I think I mentioned it on Sunday mornings. I'm reading a book now on the philosophy of the Hebrew Bible, and in this work, there's a certain the author. I'm sorry, I forgot his name right now. The author points out that people read the Hebrew Bible from a revelational perspective, and they don't treat it with the same respect that they treat rational philosophers. So they'll treat Aristotle and they'll treat Plato and analyze his works and so forth, but then a statement from Yirmiyahu, because they don't think Yirmiyahu is giving over some ideas. Yirmiyahu is giving over some revelation, which means it's beyond the ideas. It's a concept that doesn't have to be brought into our intellectual thinking. The reality is that that's much more tied to the fundamentalist approach to revelation. God gave it over clearly, and so forth and so forth, and this is it, and this is it, and this is good, and this is evil, and we all really know this is good, and this is evil. And then from our perspective, we're trying to figure out what exactly is good and evil. And it's not so simple. It really is not so simple. There's a tremendous amount of issues in terms of the Eitz Das Tov Ra, of like, law enforcement asks, why weren't they allowed to eat from it? Okay? And for example, there's midrashim that point out, like if you look at the story of the Eitz Das Tov Ra, Adam and Eve in the movies were all perceived as innocent little children, right? Right? Okay? Okay? Yeah. I pointed out my share, Adam and Eve, yeah, they would give Einstein a dunce cap. Right? Okay? And second of all, they had children. The Medrash says they had children before they ever ate from any Eitz Das. The fact of the matter is, it's a completely different story. The truth is, Adam and Eve were they're created by God. That means they were remarkably intelligent. That's why Adam created all the animals, or named all the animals. So the point is that you're talking something which is totally, because in our world, revelation is totally apart from being told you have to think. Yes, I know that in Christian thought there is this issue between reason and revelation, but it's two separate worlds. In our world, revelation demands reason to understand the revelation, right? And in a certain way, the only way we can understand the reason is with revelation. So when you talk about certain things like from a Jewish perspective, we're caught in a bind. How do we understand this? How do we work it? And that's why if you look at a lot of Jewish thought, okay, it's not so simple. It really is, because it can't contradict reason wholeheartedly. It can't, but on the other hand, it can contradict revelation wholeheartedly, because they both have values. And the fact is that really is what happens with Sinai. And the reason it happens with Sinai is the fact, and this is what I'm leading to, is the fact that Sinai becomes unique as a revelational event, because there's no other revelational event after Sinai. And Sinai is unique. Therefore, we have this tension between the revelational and the incomprehensible God and reason and so forth. On the other hand, we can't easily turn to someone who will give us answers, because we can challenge whether this person giving us answers with prophecy is actually a prophet. And in his proof of miracles, is it actually a true proof? And the Rambam is very, very emphatic about this. In fact, he says that how you know that a prophet is true, so the prophet has to give some statements of what will happen in the future. Okay? What happens if the guy knows this through magic? So the Rambam says that fact that he brings proof that for his prophecy, that doesn't mean he has a prophet. It means that halachically we have to define him as a prophet. Okay, but since someone can play these games, it's quite possible. Rambam doesn't say that this is absolute proof that he's a prophet. He basically says, given the human limitation, you have to make a decision, and it's the same way as in the courts. Courts have all these ways of, beyond a reasonable doubt and so forth, they still make mistakes. Okay? The point of the matter is you still have to follow beyond a reasonable doubt. You gotta make sure you do it right. So the Rambam basically saying is, you never really absolutely can say this person's a prophet. But keeps doing miracles and so forth, it's a pretty good chance. But the fact is that, down the road, I don't think there's anyone questioning that Shmuel Navi was a Navi, Neliyahu was a Navi, and so forth. But the point is this becomes an issue in terms of how we relate. Now, obviously, if you're more of a rationalist, you relate to the Chachamim of the rational world because they're absolute geniuses, and they show their intellectual basis. But on the other hand, you also have this issue of the revelational aspect, how they understand the revelational. So the point is, when you hear rational explanations of Torah, it usually doesn't go as far as you want it to go. On the other hand, you hear more Kabbalistic understandings of Torah, which people might be more open to and might be more willing to accept because they sort of fill in the gap. Fact is how do you know this person is really speaking from a Kabbalah, from a truth perspective of the Kabbalah and so forth? And really, it all comes down to reason. Anyway, so that's really what I wanted to say about Sinai. It's our starting point. It's a very, very difficult starting point, and it creates a lot of confusion in terms of what we have to do in understanding Torah. Anyways, any comments or?
I had a chick-made comment before that I didn't voice. The idea, at Revelation at Sinai, you get Torah. So you have Torah. Torah says that it's right. All right. So you automatically have a connection between Revelation and it's right.
Mm-hmm.
So if, by definition, we were after Revelation, we were, by definition, it's right. Because nobody who was at Revelation wasn't close.
See, this is where your point really comes in. And the Shama doesn't have to go through Yetzias Mitzrayim. The Shama just shows
Shama
up.
just goes direct.
Just
no
shows up.
Pasco. Sounds good.
What that means, like, it's so. It's the significance of Yetzias Mitzrayim in terms of our Sinai. Anochi Hashem Elokecha Asher Hotzeitecha Me'eretz Mitzrayim. He doesn't say, "I'm God, your Creator. I'm around. I'm God who took you out of Egypt." Now, how do we relate to the fact that we're taken out of Egypt? And how do we relate to the experience of slavery? I mean, the fact is, there are so many issues in terms of trying to understand this religion. It's like, did anyone here see the insight this week? My insight this week was basically the question really was what was important, not the answer so much. Anyone knows what my question was? Okay, what's the Jewish view of slavery? What's the Jewish view of slavery? It's a good thing or bad thing?
It's a bad thing, but it's human nature that.
Okay, but basically, ethically, we're not in favor of slavery, right? Okay. So the fact is a concept in understanding Torah called Torah tolerated. It's a concept that's important, but it's usually connected to Rabbi Dr. Eliezer Berkowitz. He talks about the difference between Torah tolerated and Torah mandated. And he basically says that there are certain mitzvot, such as carbonot. Okay, you like this one, obviously. The carbonot, which is really the Rambam, which basically that the world was so involved with carbonot being the way you relate to God, that God cannot just say, we're stopping carbonot, even though he understood that there was little ethical value in carbonot. So basically he created a way to limit the carbonot. Why? You had to go to one special place for the carbonot, you couldn't do carbonot right in. So eventually, so it went to the concept of Torah tolerated. So people point this out.
Torah what?
Torah tolerated. Torah tolerated. In other words, the Torah had a system where we wanted to get to a certain ethical idea, and you go there through the process of learning about it and so forth, so eventually the people will get there. One of this is also the arguments presented, slavery. Why didn't God just forbid slavery? No more slaves? Okay? Okay? Because what?
Being from Yetzias Mitzrayim, you would expect everybody would be, yay!
Yeah. Okay. So, but the fact is, it was so contrary to the way people thought, right? It was so fundamental to the way people thought that it was like, I mean, no more slavery. Okay, so the fact is so therefore you had to educate people that slavery wasn't a good thing. Okay.
But you also had to make many laws to protect the slaves,
But,
too.
and the way we did that, the way we got people to eventually not look good is because we had a lot of laws that protected the slaves. We were the first people who gave slaves rights. So that was really a problem. A lot of people didn't like that in the ancient world. The Chacham Leibowitz has an interesting thing where a conversation between a Jew and a Roman and saying, you guys really messed up our economics. You know, slavery is so important to our economic system, and you guys are so anti it, giving slaves rights. What kind of right does a slave have? You know, so the point is you have all these issues, but eventually you teach the lesson against slavery. So I point out today there's a little bit of a problem here. Okay? There is a certain slave that it is usher to ever free. Okay? The Eved Kanani has to work forever. So here's the Eved Kanani, who's a non-Jewish slave, okay, and you are not allowed to free him. Now the truth is, the Gemara talks about this, you can free him to do a mitzvah and so forth, but here's the statement that says, here's a slave, and it's usher to free him.
Is it from Canaan or
Any non-Jewish slave. Now, that seems to sit there and say slavery must have some kind of purpose. The point is God didn't make it easy. But the fact is that really there are challenges in the way we think through things and so forth. But there really is a what's the word I'm looking for? There is this constant idea that revelation does not live without reason from a Jewish perspective, and reason does not live without revelation. Which means that the Jew is constantly finding himself in this challenge of the incomprehensible and the comprehensible. And that to me, it's not an answer to the Holocaust, for example, but it's when people ask questions about the Holocaust, the fact is that Churban Bayis Rishon, Churban Bayis Sheni, Chmelnitsky, Rahman Litzlan, you try to figure out God. You know what I mean? The classical joke, hey, God, maybe we could choose another nation now. The point of the matter is that it's hard to comprehend God, especially as we're trying to learn from Him. And the uniqueness of Sinai is it's so unique a revelation, because there's the point being is that if revelation was around all the time, if you can have a revelation of Torah, tomorrow, then you have a problem. You go to the Navi and work it out. The point of the matter is you couldn't do that after Moshe Rabbeinu. You were stuck trying to work it out. I mentioned this in my shir. I think it's Eliyahu Kitov who mentions this. And it's fascinating if you think about this. Shmuel Navi comes to Yishai and says, "Let me meet your sons." Okay, one of the next kings of Israel is from your sons. I got to meet your sons. So what does Yishai do? Now you understand, Yishai is a person who never sinned. He's one of the 4 people who died.
Not this one.
What?
Not this one.
What? Okay. He's one of the 4 people who died because of the Nachash. You know who the 4 people who died because of Nachash? Okay, which means they didn't have a sin on their own accord. They died because the sin of the Eitz Hadas Tov Ra, the sin of the snake, brought death into the world. If it wasn't for that, they would never have died. Who are the 4 people? One is what? No, he wasn't one. One is Amram, the father of Moshe. Okay. Sorry, the first one is actually Binyamin, the son of Yaakov Avinu. Binyamin never sinned. Okay. The second was Amram, the father of Moshe Rabbeinu. The third was Yishai, the father of David HaMelech. And the fourth was Yishai. Fourth was someone who's only mentioned doesn't have a real big part in the Tanakh. It's Kalev ben David. David had a son named Kalev. Okay, these are the 4 people who never sinned. Now, the point is, Yishai was one who never sinned. Okay, so he's not a person who's going to be making mistakes. Shmuel says, "I want to meet your sons." He's going to bring him the sons. What does Yishai do? He brings his 7 sons, right? Eliyahu looks over the 7 sons and says, "Ain't one of these." So then Shmuel then looks at him and says, "You have another son?" And you're looking at this and saying, "What? Who?"
It's like the story sort of reminds you of the childhood.
Yeah. Okay. He looks at him and says, "Is there another son?" Yishai says, "Oh, I do have another son. He's up in the mountain tending the sheep. So go get him." "Well, Yishai, you were told to bring all your sons. Why do you do that?" So one of the arguments of Eliyahu Kito, and I mentioned this in this year, it's a fascinating idea, but if you think about it, it's like totally points out the perplexity of Torah, which we're dealing with. Yishai, there was a big machlokas in the time of Ruth. What was a big machlokas in the time of Ruth? So Boaz eventually marries Ruth, but Ploni Almoni does not marry Ruth. What's their machlokas? Why does Boaz marry Ruth and Ploni Almoni says no? Right. The fact of the matter is that there's a limud on the pasuk, Moavi v'lo Moaviyah. It means only a male Moabite, not a female Moabite. But that wasn't 100% accepted. That was a disagreement. Boaz followed the opinion that I can marry a female Moabite. What? Yes. And Ploni Almoni says no, you can't. Okay, so Boaz followed that opinion. Now Boaz had a descendant. That descendant was Yishai, and Yishai was a really big tzaddik. And Yishai, after he had a few kids and so forth, so he said, "You know something? Maybe Boaz was wrong. I should be machmer." And therefore he said to his wife, "I'm not going to divorce you, okay? But I can't live with you, okay? Because I might still have the status of a Moabite. You're a regular Jewish woman, therefore I can't live with you anymore. But we'll be married, like I got to take care of you and so forth and so forth." Now his wife didn't really like that arrangement. So Yishai seemed to have another woman, another wife, whatever, who was not a full status Jewish woman who he could have relations with. So Yishai's wife, the prime wife, went over to this other woman and says, "Listen, do you mind doing me a favor tonight? Can I dress up like you and go into your tent? And Yishai will come in and I get to be with my husband." She says, "Okay." She's a nice person. She says, "Okay." So Yishai comes in and so forth, and she becomes pregnant. And Yishai is flabbergasted. He doesn't know what's happening here. Here's his wife, who's a tzedekis, who's pregnant. He hasn't been near the woman. Like, what's going on? So he didn't know what to do. But he had a question. I can't consider, is David my son? I didn't go near the woman, so David might be a mamzer. I don't know what to do. So he had this big problem for many, many years. So on one hand, he treated David like a son. On the other hand, he was a little bit strained. The fact is, he really didn't know what to do. He was totally perplexed. So what happens was, when Shmuel comes and says, "Show me your sons," he didn't know David was really his son. Okay, so he sent the 7. Okay, now Shmuel supposedly already, in Shmuel's Bezdin, not as a Navi, but Shmuel's Bezdin, already came to the conclusion that Boaz was right. So the law was established like Boaz. Okay? It came finalized that the law became established like Boaz. Okay, Yishai was still being, whatever. The point is that because if Shmuel would have said David is a good Jew, and he knew that because God picked David to be the Melech, that would be an answer halachically from a prophetic idea. Since God picked David to be the king, must mean David is a is a full Israelite, Moavi v'lo Moaviyah, and therefore, but we can't do that because that was a halachic decision. Supposedly a halachic decision that happened before, and so forth. Anyways, but the point is Shmuel explains to, so Shmuel says to Yishai, get the other one, and when he comes back and chooses David, the whole story comes out. Really, the halacha is Moavi v'lo Moaviyah. We made the decision in Bezdin, okay, not because of my nevuah, okay, and David's your son because your wife, didn't like the idea of not having any connection with you, and then it was a fascinating story. Why am I saying it? It just tells you the interaction of the mystical and the rational in Jewish thought. Okay, the fact is that here's some kind of interaction because you didn't know how to deal with it. But what's interesting is the fact that it couldn't just be answered by going to the Navi. Okay, it's one of the big problems that we have when people, and this was one of the issues with Hasidus, with the Hasidic movement. Okay, a Rebbe making a decision. If it wasn't a halachic decision, it was fine. But the fact, but the Rebbe saying this is right. The fact of the matter is, listen. Now the truth is, I can follow a person giving me a reason for Kabbalistic reasons. I can follow, a reason from Hashkafa. You should do this and so forth. But the point is you have to understand that there's always a position of reason, even though reason is inherently a challenge to the revelational. And we Jews are called upon, that's really what we were called upon right from Sinai, right? It starts with revelational, but you better bring your reason to the plate. Okay, I hope that was enjoyable to everyone.